Hey folks, Josh here with Presidio Advisors. I work with millennials who have equity comp. And guess what? A lot of millennials with equity comp are also having kids or have kids and are now starting to ask the questions of, well, I expect and anticipate that my child is going to go to college in, let's say, 16 years or 18 years or however long it is. How much do I need to be saving for them if I think college is going to cost this much in the future? Or likewise, if they don't have kids yet, hey, I think we're going to have kids in probably the next couple of years. How much should I be saving up? Because I hear kids are expensive. And it's a very fair question and a real important one. And so I wanted to walk through this present value calculation to basically understand, if we expect the cost to be this in the future, what is the present value that we need to get to, and how much do we need to contribute every month in order to get to it? And so that is the analysis that we're going to walk through here today. And in this case, we're going to use the example of, okay, let's assume that this client, you have a child who's 2 years old. They expect their kid to go to college when they turn 18, so effectively in 16 years, and they're going to go to probably a 4-year school. And then the other assumptions that we're going to make is, and I'm totally making this up, but my job as an advisor is to plug in numbers and then have my clients tell me what they think their assumptions are, or whether or not they would adjust it or not. So let's assume that tuition today is 44,000, room and board is 20,000, and so the total cost per year today of the school that they anticipate their kids going to, or something similar, is about $64,000 a year. In 16 years, if we assume that this is the education inflation rate, and by the way, education historically has increased at a faster rate than that of general inflation. And so typically it's 4 to 5%. Will that continue in the future? Your guess is as good as mine, but we can make our models based upon what we assume. So let's assume that we expect the cost of inflation to increase 4%. That means that 64,000 multiplied by 1.04 to the 16 is basically 120,000. So $120,000 is the cost of tuition in that first year. And then of course it's going to be 119 multiplied by, inflated by 4% for year two, then inflated by 4% for year three, and inflated by 4% in year four. In this instance, we're assuming that although the cost of inflation is growing by 4% a year, we're also earning 4% annually in, some risk-free cash equivalent, a treasury bond, for example. And so basically it's kind of net neutral there. So that's why we're assuming that the actual return is zero. But 120,000 for 4 years is basically $480,000, and that's after tax. And so, of course, our investments, we're going to probably have to sell some of our investments. So the present value pre-tax is about $544,000. That 544, what that number means is by the time our child number one, our first child, starts school in 16 years, we want to have $544,000 in the bank so that we don't have to keep contributing monthly to that. How did I get 544? Well, we're making the assumption on what our tax rate is going to be. And essentially, the 12% is a mix of 529 plans and regular taxable accounts. 529 plans at a very high level, you put in your money post tax, it grows tax free, and you can withdraw it tax free if those withdrawals are used for qualified educational expenses, and tuition and room and board would qualify as qualified tuition expenses. So therefore, the withdrawals would be tax-free, which is a really nice benefit. However, there are certain limitations to 529 plans, caps that you can contribute annually, that type of thing. And so we're assuming basically a mix of taxable and non-taxable assets. So a couple of other things that we're assuming in this example, we're assuming that this family has already stashed away $90,000 or earmarked $90,000 for their kids' college tuition. And one of the questions that they are probably asking is, hey, is this $90,000 enough if we expect to earn, X percent over the next 16 years? In this example, the answer is no, it's not enough. How do we know it's not enough? Because we can see here that this number, this $1,044, that is the incremental amount that this family needs to contribute each and every month for 16 years in order to get to 544,000, given our inflationary expectations and our rates of return, et cetera. And then we're assuming a tiered approach, or taking a tiered approach to the rate of return. Why is this? Because if you put your money in a 529, it's going to start pretty aggressive, but it's going to end up being pretty conservative as you get closer to needing that cash, because you don't want to take equity risk if you're only a few years out. And so we're assuming about a 7% annualized return 10 plus years out, 5% annualized return from 5 to 9 years out, and about a 4% return 4 years until the start and through school. Now that may change. Right now you can basically get a risk-free rate for 4.5% or so, and that changes some of these assumptions and some of these numbers. But this is what we're using, and so our blended rate is 5.6%. Totally up to my clients to adjust some of these numbers within reason, and I help them to understand what is considered within reason. So with those assumptions, with these numbers, again, we need $544,000 in 16 years. What is it going to take for us to get there? If we've already socked away $90,000, the answer is $1,044 each and every month. $1,000 a month, that's basically $12,000 a year. Now the question becomes, okay, how are we going to fit this into our cash flows? We have our income, we know what our expenses are. How do we make this work? And that's where we, as a client and as a planner, have different conversations about what are the different levers that we can pull. Do we want to pull them? How hard do we want to pull them? And what are some of our options? Basically, at the end of the day, I'm giving you a menu of options, and you get to pick your favorite menu option of what you like in order to get to where you want to go, in order to achieve your goals, and to align, to make those goals align with your values. We can manipulate this a lot. For example, if we assume that we're going to have another child in, let's say, a year or so. So we have one child, that's two. We have another one on the way. Let's call them, -1 years of age. And we think that they will also go to college for 4 years, starting when they're 18. But we haven't saved anything for them. So if that's the case, then we need to start saving $1,300 a month for child number two today, and $1,000 a month for our first child, which means collectively we're looking at $2,300. And so, that's a lot of money. And then the question, again, going back to the cash flows, is can we afford it? If it's important to us and we can't afford it right now, what is the impact to our short-term, long-term, and midterm goals if we kind of pull these different levers? All right, so that's basically saving for college in a nutshell, and understanding how much do we need to save starting today, given expectations of inflation and rates of return and all that. And then the other question that I get is, hey, we're thinking about having kids. Like, how much is this going to run us? We're super excited, but do we have enough saved? And what are some of the incremental expenses that we should be modeling out? So that's when we can go over here. My rule of thumb, and again, this really depends on your specific situation and where you live, cost of living, that type of thing. But I generally assume that for your first child, for the clients that I am working with, it's probably going to be around $3,000 in incremental expenses every month. That includes nannying and daycare and babysitting and food and maybe doctor's appointments or incremental, additional plane tickets, that type of stuff. But I think for your first kid, I start to model out with around $3,000 a month, which is about $36,000 a year. Again, you as the client get to tell me whether or not that's realistic or not. Child number two is probably a little less. You have some hand-me-downs. You kind of know how things go, but you also probably have a better gauge of what this expected cost is going to be. But we can adjust this. And so essentially here, what we're looking at is, hey, we think we're going to have a child in 2 years, so the child's effectively -2. The expenses are going to start right when they're born, and we're modeling in this particular, in these cells for 1 year of expenses. And oh, by the way, we've already saved $85,000, or we've earmarked 85K, and I'm totally making this number up, for this particular child in a savings account that is earning us, let's call it 4.5%. And we think inflation is going to be 3% a year, and we have some assumptions on our capital gains tax. So with these assumptions, we can say, okay, it's costing us $36,000 today if we were to have a kid today, but we're about 2 years out. So in 2 years, if inflation's actually at 3%, then our actual cost is going to be closer to $38,000. And then if we look at that, what that present value is, and we look at it pre-tax, then basically what that means is that we need to have about $47,000 in the bank by the time our kid is born, so that after taxes, we have enough to fund that first year, and we don't have to make additional contributions. Um, so what does that look like? Well, you've already socked away $85,000. So in this particular case, you don't actually need to set aside anything else. But this is just 1 year of expenses. If we look at year two, for example, so let's say 2027, we still, we're expecting our child in 2 years, but these expenses are going to be for 2027 only. So they're going to start when the child is now 1 year old, and they're going to go for a year. And so in 3 years now, with an inflation rate of 3%. We haven't socked away anything for this particular year. Our costs are going to be $39,000, and the present value pre-tax is going to be about $48,000. So if we discount that back, what this says is, what the math shows us is that we need to contribute $1,200, $1,300 a month to be able to cover these costs for this particular year. So we do this for the first 5 years or so. The reason why like to look at it for the first 5 years, so 2026, which is basically year one, 2027, year two, 28, year three, and then 29, year four. Um, the reason why I basically stop at 2029 is because trying to predict anything past 5 years out, to it's 2024 right now, very difficult to do, and is even more of a shot in the dark than some of the models that we're putting together. So I think this is probably a good place to start. The other thing is, you're probably going to allocate your money a little bit differently if you're not going to need it for 5 years than if you need it within 5 years, where I would encourage clients to take a lot less risk because you're going to need that cash. So we make a couple assumptions here. Again, let's assume, we also expect to have another child in 2029. So that child is basically 5 years out. And then we can look to see what these monthly contributions will need. And in the end, what we do is we take all these monthly contributions. So we're going to need $760 per month for child number two in 2029, 760 per month for child one in 2029, 944, 1250, and then obviously we have a leftover amount for 2026. We add that all up, and we basically get to $1,900 per month that we need to start saving in order to be able to cover the expected expenses from 2026 through 2029. Now, that's $22,000 a year. It's a lot of money. And, maybe this isn't an issue for you as a family, but typically what I end up having conversations with my clients is, where are we going to get that $22,000 from? What levers do we want to pull? Where do we either need to pull back in, terms of other variable spending, or how are we going to be able to generate that much more income so that we can cover this? And these are the really interesting and engaging and fun conversations that I really, well, sometimes not fun, but engaging conversations that I like to have. We kind of put the numbers out there, and we can see, hey, here's our income. Here's what we expect to pay in taxes. Here's our variable expenses for the year. Here's what we pay in fixed, housing costs. And here's where we can basically pull different levers. Maybe we don't want to contribute as much to the college education, or maybe we're spending way too much on, dining out, so we can pull back there and basically have this cash available. But this is kind of, this is what the numbers look like when we want to run a present value analysis of how much do we actually need if we want to consider inflation and our rates of return, and when we're going to need the cash, et cetera, and our tax rates and that type of thing. So I hope this is helpful. I love running these analyses and helping my clients think through it. I am happy to talk with you if this is something of interest. You can email me, josh@presidioadvisorsllc.com, or you can find me on my website, presidioadvisorsllc.com. And I hope this helps. Thanks a lot. Bye.